They threatened to fine me $500 a day for installing a wheelchair ramp for my mother. But what they didn't know was that I used to work for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Their little power play was about to become the biggest mistake in our HOA's history. If you enjoy stories about standing up to unreasonable HOA demands, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow and doesn't cost you a thing. I never thought I'd be the one going to war with our HOA. I was always the peacekeeper, the reasonable one who tried to see both sides. That all changed the day I found my 72-year-old mother sobbing on our front porch, clutching a violation notice while balancing precariously on her walker. "They're going to make me move, Michael," she said between sobs, her hands trembling as she handed me the notice. "I don't think I can handle another move at my age." I scanned the official-looking document, my blood pressure rising with each line. The letterhead featured Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association in bold, pretentious font, as if the name alone commanded respect. The message was clear. The temporary wooden ramp I'd installed last weekend was an unsightly modification made without proper approval and needed to be removed within 48 hours, or we'd face daily fines. My mother had moved in with me 3 months ago after her hip replacement. Her recovery was taking longer than expected, and the 3 steps to my front door had become an insurmountable obstacle. The temporary wooden ramp was just that, temporary, until we could get a proper solution installed. I helped Mom inside and made her a cup of tea before studying the notice more carefully. It was signed by Victoria Harrington, HOA President, for the past 5 years and self-appointed guardian of property values in our quiet suburban community. I'd seen her at neighborhood gatherings, always impeccably dressed, with her graying hair perfectly styled and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Victoria had moved to Oak Ridge Estates about 7 years ago and quickly worked her way onto the HOA board. Within a year, she was president, and the neighborhood had changed, gone were the friendly block parties and casual chats over fences. In their place came a steady stream of violation notices for everything from trash cans, left out 6 minutes past the designated time, to flower beds with non-conforming color schemes. I sighed and reached for my phone. I'd try the reasonable approach first. Victoria answered on the 4th ring, her voice crisp and professional. "This is Victoria Harrington." "Hi, Victoria. This is Michael Chen from 1842 Oak Ridge Drive. I received a violation notice about the temporary ramp for my mother." "Yes, Mr. Chen," she cut in smoothly. "Section 7.3 of our CC&Rs clearly states that all exterior modifications must receive prior board approval. We take these rules very seriously to maintain our community standards." I took a deep breath. "I understand that, but this is a temporary solution for my mother's mobility issues. She's recovering from hip replacement surgery, and I sympathize with your situation," Victoria said in a tone that suggested anything but sympathy. "But rules are rules. If we make an exception for you, we'd have to make exceptions for everyone. You're welcome to submit a formal modification request at our next board meeting, which is scheduled for the 27th. "That's 3 weeks away," I pointed out. "My mother needs access to our home now. Then I suggest you find a solution that doesn't violate our community guidelines," she replied. "Perhaps your mother could stay somewhere else until she's more mobile." I bit back the angry retort that sprang to my lips. "Victoria, this is a matter of accessibility for a disabled person. There are federal laws." "Mr. Chen, I'm quite familiar with the law," she said, her voice cooling several degrees. "And I'm also familiar with our CC&Rs, which your family agreed to when you purchased your home. The board's decision is final unless you submit a formal appeal. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief. 7 years at the Department of Justice had taught me a lot about dealing with difficult people, but Victoria Harrington was in a class of her own. Mom's voice called from the living room. "Everything okay, dear?" I forced a smile as I walked back in. "Just fine, Mom. Don't worry about the notice. I'll handle it." She looked unconvinced, but nodded. "I don't want to cause trouble, Michael. Maybe I should just try the steps again." "Absolutely not," I said firmly, remembering how she'd fallen last month trying to navigate those same steps. "The doctor was clear about your restrictions. The ramp stays until you're fully recovered." That night, after Mom had gone to bed, I pulled out my laptop and began researching. As a former civil rights attorney, I knew the basics. The Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination based on disability, and reasonable modifications had to be permitted, even in communities with strict HOA rules. But I wanted to be thorough. 3 hours and several legal databases later, I had compiled enough information to feel confident in our position. The temporary ramp was exactly the kind of reasonable accommodation protected by federal law. Victoria's dismissive response wasn't just unkind, it was potentially illegal. I drafted a formal response to the violation notice, citing the relevant sections of the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. I outlined my mother's medical condition and attached a letter from her orthopedic surgeon explaining her mobility restrictions. I concluded by respectfully requesting that the violation notice be rescinded, while making it clear that we were prepared to pursue the matter further if necessary. It was professional, factual, and firm. Everything a good legal response should be. I printed it out, signed it, and placed it in an envelope for delivery the next day. As I shut down my laptop, I noticed a new email notification. It was from our neighborhood listserv, a message from Victoria to all residents. Reminder: the Architectural Review Committee will be conducting inspections this weekend. Please ensure your properties are in compliance with all guidelines. Special attention will be paid to unauthorized structures, non-compliant landscaping, and improper storage of garbage. Bins. The timing seemed far from coincidental. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. Victoria Harrington had no idea who she was dealing with, and something told me she was about to find out. The next morning, I dropped my response in Victoria's mailbox and headed to work, hoping that would be the end of it. I should have known better. When I returned home that evening, 2 more notices were taped to my front door. The first cited landscaping violations. Apparently, the roses my mother had planted along our walkway were not on the approved plant list. The second claimed our garbage bins were visible from the street, though they were tucked neatly against the side of the house behind a small lattice screen. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of her famous chicken soup. She glanced up when I walked in, and I quickly stuffed the notices into my pocket. "How was your day, dear?" she asked, her smile not quite hiding the worry in her eyes. "Same old bureaucratic nonsense," I replied, kissing her cheek. "How about you? How's the hip feeling?" "Better," she said, though the way she leaned heavily on the counter told me otherwise. "I managed to water my roses using that grabber tool you bought me." I felt a pang of guilt. Mom had always been fiercely independent, and this injury had robbed her of that independence. The last thing she needed was to feel like a burden. "Those roses are looking beautiful," I said. "They remind me of the ones you had at the old house." Her face brightened. "That's exactly why I chose them. They're the same variety your father gave me on our first anniversary." Her expression clouded slightly. "But that woman from the HOA was taking pictures of them today. Is there something wrong with having roses?" I sighed. Victoria was moving faster than I'd anticipated. "No, Mom, there's nothing wrong with your roses. Some people just have nothing better to do than make a fuss over nothing." After dinner, I helped Mom get settled in front of the TV and retreated to my home office. It was time to get serious. I pulled out the HOA governing documents I'd received when I bought the house 5 years ago and began a methodical review. By midnight, I had filled a legal pad with notes and discovered some very interesting information. First, the current board had never properly updated the architectural guidelines they were now enforcing so vigorously. The document Victoria had cited in her violation notice hadn't been formally adopted according to the procedures outlined in the HOA bylaws. Second, the board meetings had gradually shifted from the community centre to Victoria's living room, and attendance had dwindled to just the board members and a few of Victoria's close friends. Minutes were sparse and vague, with financial reports that raised more questions than they answered. Most interestingly, I discovered that board elections were significantly overdue. Victoria had been re-elected unopposed 3 years ago for a 2-year term. According to the bylaws, new elections should have been held last year. I leaned back in my chair, considering this information. Victoria's HOA wasn't just being unreasonable. It appeared to be operating outside its own rules. This changed everything. The next morning was Saturday, and I was enjoying coffee on the back patio when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Victoria standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, and 2 board members flanking her like enforcers. I opened the door with my most pleasant smile. "Good morning, Victoria. What brings you by so early?" Her eyes flicked past me to the interior of my house. "We're conducting the scheduled inspections," I announced. "We need to document the violations on your property." "I wasn't aware that inspections included the inside of homes," I said, not moving from the doorway. "The exterior violations have been noted," she said, consulting her clipboard. "Unauthorized ramp structure, non-approved plantings, visible trash receptacles." She looked up. "We've also received noise complaints." I raised an eyebrow. "Noise complaints? About what?" Victoria's smile was thin. "Apparently, someone has been playing piano after the 9 p.m. quiet hours." I almost laughed. My mother's arthritis made it painful for her to play her beloved piano these days, but occasionally, on good days, she'd play a gentle nocturne before bed. The idea that anyone would complain about that was absurd. "I see," I said. "Well, I've responded formally to your violation notice regarding the ramp, which is a temporary and necessary accommodation for my mother's disability. As for the other alleged violations, I'll review them once I receive official notice." Victoria's smile disappeared. "Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. The board has the authority to impose significant fines, and if those remain unpaid, we can place a lien on your property." "I understand perfectly," I replied, "and I don't think you understand the seriousness of denying reasonable accommodations to a disabled person in violation of federal law, but I'm sure we can work this out reasonably." The board member to Victoria's right, a tall man with a perpetual frown, whom I recognized as Victoria's husband, James, stepped forward. "Listen, Chen, we've been pretty patient, but—" Victoria placed a manicured hand on his arm. "That's enough, James." She turned back to me. "The board will review your response. In the meantime, the violations stand. Good day, Mr. Chen." They turned and walked away, pausing at the edge of my property to take more photos of the ramp and my mother's roses. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding with anger. This was no longer just about a ramp. This was about abuse of power and a blatant disregard for both HOA rules and federal law. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague, Sarah, who specialized in housing discrimination cases. "How's operation? Ramp rescue going? Need any backup?" I smiled. Sarah had been my mentor at the DOJ, and we'd stayed close after I left to take care of Mom. "Might need your expertise after all," I texted back. "Things are escalating." "Say the word, and I'll bring the cavalry," she responded immediately. I was about to reply when I heard a crash from the kitchen, followed by my mother's cry of pain. Rushed to find her on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and spilled water. She'd been trying to reach a glass in the high cabinet, something I'd told her to leave for me. "I'm sorry," she said, tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to be useful. I hate being a burden." "You're never a burden," I said firmly, carefully helping her up and checking for injuries. "You're my mom." As I cleaned up the glass and ice, I made a decision. This wasn't just about rules and regulations anymore. This was about dignity and respect. And Victoria Harrington needed to learn that some things were more important than property values and architectural consistency. The next morning, I began implementing my plan. First, I emailed Sarah detailed notes about our situation, along with copies of all the HOA documents I'd reviewed. Her response was quick and enthusiastic. "They're operating on expired authority and enforcing unapproved guidelines? Oh, this is going to be fun. Give me 48 hours to put together a strategy." Next, I reached out to my neighbors. Over the years, I'd kept to myself, busy with work and now with Mom's care. But I remembered the friendly community this had been before Victoria took over, and I suspected others might be chafing under her reign as well. I started with the Patels next door, who had received a violation notice last year for their Diwali decorations. Mrs. Patel invited me in for chai and listened intently as I explained the situation. "We've been afraid to speak up," she admitted. Victoria implied that challenging the board could result in more scrutiny of our property. "But what they're doing to your mother isn't right." By the end of the day, I'd spoken with 12 neighbors. Every single one had a story about Victoria's harsh enforcement and selective application of the rules. More importantly, none of them had been notified about overdue board elections or consulted on the new architectural guidelines. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work. Sarah had delivered as promised, sending over a comprehensive legal strategy along with draft letters that could be sent to the HOA board. But first, I had one more stop to make. The county recorder's office was quiet when I arrived. The clerk, a friendly woman named Doris, helped me locate the official records for Oak Ridge Estates, HOA. "Interesting," she said as she pulled up the documents. "There haven't been any updates filed in quite some time. No election results, no bylaw amendments. That's unusual for an active HOA." "Very unusual," I agreed, scanning the documents. "Could I get copies of everything you have on file?" Armed with official county records that confirmed the board's term had expired, I returned home to find an unexpected scene. A small construction crew was dismantling my mother's ramp while Victoria supervised from the sidewalk. I parked and rushed, over phone in hand and already recording. "What's going on here?" I demanded. Victoria turned, not bothering to hide her smugness. "The board convened an emergency meeting yesterday and voted to remove the unauthorized structure. Section 12.2 of the CC&Rs gives us the authority to abate violations after proper notice." "You can't do this," I said, stepping between the workers and what remained of the ramp. "This is a violation of federal law, and you know it." "Your response was considered and rejected," Victoria said coldly. "You had your chance to comply voluntarily." I noticed neighbors beginning to gather, watching the confrontation. The Patels were there, along with the Johnsons from across the street and several others I'd spoken with yesterday. "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice calm and clear, "I'm going to ask these workers to stop right now. What you're doing is illegal, on multiple levels." "I've consulted our attorney," she replied, though something flickered in her eyes. "The HOA is within its rights." "Is your attorney aware that your board's term expired over a year ago, or that the architectural guidelines you're enforcing were never properly adopted according to your own bylaws?" I held up the folder from the county recorder's office. "Because I have the official records right here." The construction workers paused, looking uncertainly between Victoria and me. That's a technicality," Victoria sputtered. "The community has accepted our authority by complying with our decisions." "Actually," came Mrs. Patel's voice, From behind me, we weren't aware that your term had expired or that we were due for new elections. And I never received notice of any meeting to vote on new architectural guidelines, added Mr. Johnson. Victoria's face flushed. This is ridiculous. James, call our attorney. Her husband pulled out his phone and stepped away, but I could see the concern on his face. I turned to the construction workers. Gentlemen, I'm a former civil rights attorney with the Department of Justice. What's happening here is a violation of the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you continue dismantling this ramp, you could be personally liable under federal law. The crew leader scratched his head. Look, we just go where we're told. I don't want any legal trouble. I understand, I said, but I'm officially informing you that this structure is a legally protected accommodation for a disabled person. The crew leader nodded and turned to his men. Pack it up, guys. We're not getting involved in this. Victoria stepped forward, her face contorted with anger. You can't just walk away. We have a contract. Invoice us for your time, I told the crew leader. This isn't your fight. As the workers began loading their tools, Victoria turned on me. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Chen. I've maintained this community's standards for years, and I won't let you destroy everything we've built. This isn't about destroying anything, I replied. It's about following the law, both the HOA's own rules and federal housing law. I addressed the growing crowd of neighbors. Did you all know that we were supposed to have board elections last year, or that the architectural guidelines being enforced were never properly adopted? The murmurs and headshakes confirmed what I'd suspected. Victoria had been ruling through intimidation and misinformation. James returned, looking grim. Victoria, Gordon says we should stop and discuss this privately. Victoria looked around at the neighbors, the departing construction crew, and finally at me. For a moment, I thought she might continue arguing, but instead she straightened her shoulders and adopted a tight smile. We'll continue this discussion at the next board meeting, she said, which will be held next Tuesday at the community center. All homeowners are welcome to attend. With that, she turned and walked away. James, hurrying after her. The neighbors converged around me, asking questions and sharing their own HOA horror stories. For the first time since Victoria had taken over, people were talking openly about their frustrations and fears. What happens now? Mrs. Patel asked. I smiled. Now we prepare for that board meeting. The next week was a flurry of activity. Sarah helped me draft a comprehensive presentation on the HOA's legal vulnerabilities, while neighbors volunteered to distribute notices about the upcoming meeting and the issues at stake. Mom watched it all with a mixture of pride and concern. Are you sure you want to take this on? She asked. I don't want to cause trouble for you. I sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in mine. You're not causing trouble, Mom. Victoria and her board are the ones causing trouble by ignoring the law and abusing their power. Besides, this isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone in this community. Tuesday evening arrived, and the community center was packed. Every chair was filled, with people standing along the walls. Victoria sat at the front table with James and two other board members, looking uncomfortable at the unprecedented turnout. She called the meeting to order, attempting to stick to the standard agenda, but when she reached new business, I raised my hand. Yes, Mr. Chen, she said reluctantly. I stood, carrying my folder of documents. I'd like to address several urgent matters concerning the governance of our HOA. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically outlined the board's expired term, the improperly adopted guidelines, and the pattern of selective enforcement. I presented documentation of federal housing laws protecting reasonable accommodations for disabled residents, and I concluded by calling for immediate board elections as required by our bylaws. The room was silent when I finished. Then Mr. Johnson stood up. "I move that we hold board elections immediately, as Mr. Chen suggests." "Seconded," called Mrs. Patel. Victoria looked stunned. "This is highly irregular. We need time to prepare proper ballots and—" "Section A of our bylaws allows for nominations from the floor," I interrupted. "You've had 18 months to prepare for the elections that should have happened last year." The crowd murmured in agreement. Victoria looked to James for support, but he was staring at the table. Finally, she sighed. "Very well. We'll accept nominations for the board positions." What followed was remarkable. Neighbors who had never spoken at meetings before stood to nominate themselves or others. When the dust settled, we had 7 candidates for 5 board positions, none of them Victoria or her current board members. The vote was held by show of hands, and by the end of the evening, Oak Ridge Estates had a new HOA board, led by Mrs. Patel as president and Mr. Johnson as vice president. I had declined nomination, preferring to serve as an advisor on legal matters. As the meeting adjourned, Victoria approached me, her expression unreadable. "Congratulations," she said stiffly. "You've certainly stirred things up." "That wasn't my intention," I replied honestly. "I just wanted my mother to be able to access our home safely." She nodded slightly. "For what it's worth, it was never personal. I truly believe strong rules make for better communities." "Rules are important," I agreed. "But so is compassion and flexibility, and following proper procedures." Victoria glanced at the celebrating neighbors. "Well, they've got their chance now. We'll see how they do without my guidance." As she walked away, I felt a mix of emotions, satisfaction at the outcome, but also a certain sadness that it had come to this. Victoria wasn't a villain. She was just someone who had lost perspective on what really mattered in a community. The new board's first official act was to formally approve all reasonable accommodations for disabled residents, including my mother's temporary ramp there. Second was to establish a committee to review and simplify the architectural guidelines with input from all homeowners. Over the following months, something remarkable happened in Oak Ridge Estates. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other were suddenly collaborating on community projects. The annual block party was revived, children played in front yards again, and a spirit of cooperation replaced the fear of violation notices. My mother's mobility improved gradually, and by summer she could manage the steps with just a cane. I removed the temporary ramp, but by then the new board had approved guidelines for permanent accessibility modifications that would benefit everyone. Victoria and James sold their house that fall and moved to a condominium downtown. The day they moved out, Mum insisted on baking her famous banana bread as a goodbye gift. "Are you sure?" I asked, surprised. She smiled. "Holding grudges only hurts yourself, Michael. That's something your father always said, remember? We left the bread on their doorstep with a simple note wishing them well. Victoria never acknowledged it, but I like to think it made a difference. As for me, I found myself serving as an informal advisor to neighboring HOAs interested in reforming their own practices. Sarah convinced me to write a guide for homeowners facing similar situations, which has now been downloaded thousands of times. The grey ramp that caused so much conflict is long gone, but its impact remains in our revitalized community, in the new accessibility-friendly guidelines, and in the reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right can change things for everyone. Have you ever had your own HOA nightmare? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one and might feature your story in an upcoming video. Tips for dealing with difficult HOAs. Know your rights. Federal laws like the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act protect your right to reasonable accommodations and modifications, regardless of HOA rules. Document everything. Keep copies of all notices, communications, and your responses. Take photos of any disputed issues and keep a detailed timeline of events. Research your HOA's governing documents. Many HOAs operate with expired authority or enforce rules that weren't properly adopted. Your county recorder's office can provide official records. Build community support. If you're facing unreasonable enforcement, chances are your neighbors are too. Organize and share information about your HOA's operations and legal obligations.